now about the importance of listening in the coaching relationship. One of the most important things you can do as a coach, as anyone walking with someone in the process of transformation, is to listen to them, and to listen to them in a different way than most of us are used to listening. When you go to the website eHow and you type in how to listen, you get an article that says listening, and then it, like all the articles on eHow do, it says difficulty, and it rates it as moderately easy. And this kind of listening we're going to talk about, if it's moderately easy for you, you're doing it wrong. This is the kind of listening where you go deep with another person into their own experience and invite God to be in that with you. And it is transformative, which is why it's a key skill for faith-walking coaches to have. I want you to think about a time that someone listened to you and they gave you the complete space to say what you needed to say, and to say it the way you needed to say it. And I want you to think about the impact that had on your life, because chances are you were different after that conversation than you were before. Probably you were able to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. You were able to get out all of the stuff that was standing in the way of your understanding and God's work in your life. Chances are you were able to hear your own voice of wisdom. And at the end of that conversation, you knew some things you didn't know before. And you understood some things about yourself or about your situation that you didn't understand before. And that's the transformative nature of this kind of listening. In this session, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to talk about what this listening is and the way of being that we bring to our listening. And then we're also going to talk about just some specific skills that you need to have and be developing, be working on as you work on your coaching skills. So the first thing we have to understand, and we have to understand it on a really deep level, is that the point of conversation is understanding. I tell people all the time, you can't win a conversation, because a conversation is not about dominating, it's not about getting your way, it's not about getting someone to do something or getting an idea across. The point of a conversation between two people at the most basic fundamental level is that we can be understood and we can understand. There is no way that you can understand what my internal experience is like, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm wanting. You can't understand any of that unless I tell you. And the only way you can understand it is if I trust you enough to tell you and you are quiet enough to listen. And so a conversation is successful when one person has been able to talk in such a way that they can be understood, and the other person has been able to listen in such a way that they understand, and then be able to close the loop by conveying to the other person that understanding. The power of this kind of deep listening is that the other person feels understood. It's not enough just that we hear the words. That's why this is not a difficulty level of moderately easy. It's easy to hear the words. My husband is a great listener, but there are times that I will say to him, "You're not listening to me," and he will say, "I heard every word you said," and he can even parrot back to me everything that I just said, but something was missing because he didn't convey to me that he understood what I said, and so I couldn't know that. And so a conversation is successful when I have insight into another person's point of view, and I have really understood not just the words that they've said, but on an experiential level, what their perspective is, what their experience is like, and I've been able to convey that back to them. I personally believe that this is a really important part of our discipleship. That when Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, this is a really important way that we obey that command. Because the truth is, I know what I think. I know how I feel. I put a lot of emotional energy into what I think and what I feel, what my perspective is, what my opinions are. I love you as I love myself when I am just as interested in what you think and what you feel and what your perspective is. And so it's really an act of love for me to be willing to climb behind the eyes of my coachee and see the world as he or she sees it. The first objection that people often have to that kind of listening is that they say, yeah, but if I act like I understand, then that's agreeing with them, and maybe I don't agree with them, and I don't want to give the impression that I agree if I don't. And so I want to remind you that in faith walking, we listen, at least at first, from a different place. We have the discipline that we set aside. Do I agree with this or do I disagree with this? Do I like this or do I not like this? And we have the willingness to just listen to understand. Scientists tell us, the people that study this stuff tell us that we will listen to another person for 3 to 9 seconds before we have emotionally started to react and begun to formulate our response in our own minds. We give another person 3 to 9 seconds of our attention before we've moved on to our own stuff. And so we're just challenging ourselves to listen in a way that we can extend that 3 to 9 seconds to minutes and maybe even hours of listening, where we are just paying attention to understanding the other person and looking at things from their perspective. So what that means is that if we are going to listen in this transformational way, we have to be able to manage our own anxiety, because the truth is, when people start saying things we don't like, we don't agree with, we start to get anxious, we start to vibrate. And so to have this skill as an effective coach, the job becomes now we're managing our own anxiety even as we're listening to that other person. You probably need to know what your default is, because we fall pretty much into 2 camps. It may be that when you start to vibrate as you listen to someone, you immediately go into the mode that you need to persuade them. You need to say something, maybe to correct them or to redirect them, but you've got to say something to get your 2 cents worth in. You may have the opposite response, that when you start to vibrate in response to listening to someone, that you actually start to shut down. You distance yourself. Maybe you stay physically present, but you're not listening quite so much anymore. Something inside of you is switched off or detached. And so you probably need to know what it is that you tend to do. Do you tend to move toward the situation and try to fix it, or are you trying to move away from the situation and get some distance? And whatever it is that you do, don't do that. You need to be aware that you're vibrating, be able to calm yourself in the moment, be able to remind yourself, just listen to understand. There are days that I wish I could just tattoo that on the inside of my eyelids. Listen to understand, to remind myself to stay in that place of calm, listening, not judging, not evaluating, but just bringing my presence to the situation and allowing the other person to say what they need to say and to say it in the way that they need to say it. One thing that we know about listening is that the power of listening is established when we're babies. And this is important both on a being level and on a technique level. If you'll think about it for a minute, if a baby is crying, the mom will walk the baby around, hold the baby on her shoulder, and the baby will be crying and screaming. And what does the mom do? The mom makes noise. It's like, oh, bless your heart. You know, you're so sad. And her voice starts to kind of mirror the unhappiness that the baby is feeling. And a few months later, that maybe the baby starts to talk, and so the baby will say, ba, 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 ba. And what does the mom do? Well, then the mom will look at the baby in the eye and say, ba, 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 ba. And there's that connection between them. And we actually have neurons that are called mirror neurons, that when another person mirrors us in terms of our emotional state, we feel understood, and we feel connected, and we feel like they get us, which is where so much of the power is in being understood. And so that's the being part we need to understand, the importance of mirroring another person in terms of their mood. But the technique is this. that when someone is sharing with us, our emotional reaction needs to be somewhere in the vicinity of their emotional state. And so if someone comes in and says, oh, I had a terrible day, and our response is, oh, I'm sorry about that, we haven't gotten them, and they don't feel understood. They don't feel like we got what they were trying to say. And likewise, if they come in and say, I had a terrible day, and we say, oh my God, you had a terrible day, I'm so sorry. They don't feel understood because our reaction is over the top. And so what needs to happen almost all the time, there are some exceptions, but almost all the time, we want to moderate our response so that it's similar to the emotional state of the other person. And that helps them to feel like we get where they are, which also means that we have to be attuned to the other person. It can't be about us and our emotional reaction. It has to be us being willing to moderate our own anxiety and attune to the other person, bring our emotional state in line with theirs. So when we say something like that we have to manage our own anxiety in a conversation, one thing that means is that a skill that we're developing is the ability to listen to our own inner dialogue at the very same time that we're listening to another person. And so we're listening to that little voice inside of us, and we're calming it, and we're dealing with that and not bringing that to the conversation with the other person, while at the same time we're putting all of our conscious attention on that other person. While we're doing that, we're listening below the surface. We're listening for feelings, not just content. We're paying attention to how the other person is being as they share with us, as they talk to us. That's harder to do on a coaching call on the telephone. It's harder to attend to some of those kinds of things because we can't see it. I'm experimenting with Skype in coaching. Some of you might want to try that, where at least we can have a visual. But the truth is that we might even have to ask about what someone's experience is. We may need to say, you sound a little tearful. Is that how you feel, or do you just have allergies today? We may need to ask about that. But the idea is that we are, as we're listening to the content, which is important, we're also listening for feelings. We're listening for the bottom line. A lot of times as people talk, they will go around and around and around with lots of content. And we don't want to get sucked into all the details. Did that happen on Wednesday, or did that happen on Thursday? Did that happen at 10 o'clock in the morning, or did it happen in the afternoon? The more anxious someone is, the more they can throw in a lot of those extraneous details. What we want to do is to be able to come back and really get the feeling. Sounds like that was really hard for you. That sounds like a really chaotic day. And to be able to connect on the level of feelings. We're also listening for the bottom line. That in all those details, are we really getting what it is that they're trying to tell us? And it may not be in all the content. And so that's a skill that we have to learn. I try to even think, especially if someone's telling me a long story that I don't necessarily understand exactly why they're telling me this, to be listening for what is the message in the story, and to try to come up with that and be able to reflect that back to the person. Let's talk a minute about how you reflect understanding back to another person. I think there are a few ways we do that in terms of content. If you're fully present, there's a good chance that the other person is going to get that you get what they're saying. But there are still some ways, some skills we can develop to do that. One is we reflect back to a person exactly what they said. They say, I had a really bad day, and we say, oh, a bad day. And so we use their words. We may add a little bit of emotion of our own, but we just let them know we heard the words they said. There's also the skill of reflecting back to another person what they said, but doing it in our own words. And we will know if we have connected. They will say, oh, exactly, that's what I mean. Or they'll say, well, no, and they'll clarify for us. And either way, that's a good thing. But we use our own words to reflect back to them. It's all right with me if you never want to use the phrase, what I hear you saying is, that's okay. But the skill is still the same, the ability to say, in essence, this is what I hear you saying, and to say it in our own words. One thing that we can do in terms of conveying that we get the message is to take the metaphors that another person uses and use them again and again in the coaching. So let's imagine that someone in the very first face-to-face says, well, what I really want from coaching, I want transformation. I want to be like that caterpillar that turns into the butterfly. Well, that can be a metaphor that I can bring up in the next session and the next session. I can say things like, well, did you feel like a butterfly this week? Or, well, how are you doing in the chrysalis there, making that transformation to butterfly? I might send a card to that person that has a butterfly on the front, just kind of acknowledging that for them that metaphor has a lot of meaning. And so the ability to lift out important metaphors and use them again and again is a very good way of conveying that we get what another person is trying to tell us. The fourth thing that we can do is through the nonverbals. And again, that's hard when you're on the telephone. The nonverbals are hard. It's harder for, if you tear up in response to something someone is saying, they may not see that. Or if you in normal conversation want to reach out and touch that person, you can't do that over the phone, and so that is trickier. One nonverbal way of communicating that is both helpful and can be problematic is the use of saying things like as someone's talking. The well-placed or right, or I get that, or yeah, can convey, keep talking, I understand. But if we use that too often, we essentially shut the other person down. And you may have had the experience of talking to someone who keeps saying, and after a while, it gets annoying. Ask the people in your life if you do that, because chances are if you do, you don't know it. And that can be just a tick, just a nervous habit that you're going to want to get rid of if you actually do that. It shuts people down. One thing that a good listener is going to do, or rather not going to do, is that when we're listening well, we don't interrupt. And of course, we don't interrupt because we understand that the power is in the listening. And so we don't want to short circuit that. But the truth is that a lot of us, we think of something, we think, I've just got to say this, and we interrupt again. Chances are, if that is your bad habit, you may not know it, so you probably need to ask some people, do I interrupt? Do you feel like I let you finish your thoughts? There are a few exceptions to this in coaching. One would be when there's just so much energy that everyone's kind of talking at once, and it's not ideal, but it's a result of the energy around something, and everyone's enthusiastic, and I wouldn't shut that down. That is okay from time to time. The second time we interrupt is when we're trying to redirect the conversation. We may need to do that to manage time. We may have to say, I really don't want to interrupt you, but we only have this much time left, and I want to be sure you get to say everything you want to say. We also may want to interrupt to redirect the content. If we see somebody going down the same old path, for example, or into some unproductive areas, we may want to call them back up and say, let's go a different direction with this. And that's okay, again, use sparingly, but for the most part, we don't want to interrupt. We want to let the person say what it is they want to say. Once we have really established this presence, another way that we listen well is by inviting people to continue to talk to us by asking good questions. And the skill of asking good questions is just essential. Here's a technique you can play around with. Once a conversation gets started on a topic, ask 3 questions before you actually interject any of your own opinions, before you say what you think. Just discipline yourself to ask 3 questions to get at deeper understanding. So So someone tells us that they've had a hard day, and then we ask 3 questions, and people will say, well, what 3 questions should I ask? Well, we don't know. Listen to what the person says and let your question come out of what they've already said to you. But we can ask the question to ask them to give us more information about their experience. And each question can be progressively deeper. For example, someone says, I didn't do my homework. And at that moment, we have a decision to make. We can either go into further, we can ask questions about the content of what they've just said. If we did that, we would ask a question like, why didn't you do your homework? What kept you from doing your homework? And the questioning can go down that path. At a higher level, we can ask a question about that person's current experience. So instead of asking about the content of what they just said, we're asking about the process. And so I might ask something like, what's that like for you to say right now, I didn't do my homework? And the other person might say, well, it's embarrassing because I don't want to disappoint you, and I don't want you to be disappointed in me, and so then I have the opportunity to ask a question like, does that intersect with your vows at all? Do you recognize any of your vows in that? Or to say, are there some other places in your life that you're really worried about disappointing people? I might say, right now, do you feel like I'm disappointed? What would be your response if I was disappointed? And to process on a little bit deeper level with someone right now what their experience is. And that's just a little bit deeper way of questioning, to question about what's happening right here in the present. We don't want to play Barbara Walters. We don't want to ask questions just to kind of dig around in people's psyches or to satisfy our own curiosity. The purpose of asking questions, first of all, is to keep the focus on the other person instead of drawing it to myself. And the other reason is to get at a deeper level of understanding and to guide that other person to coming to a deeper level of understanding than they have initially as they're sharing whatever it is that they want to share. I'm giving you, as part of your homework, a listening checklist. And these are the questions I'm going to ask you to ask yourself after key conversations. Did I give my full attention to the conversation? Listening is not passive. It's a very active thing that we do. And for that reason, I want to really encourage all of us not to do other things while we're coaching. It is not possible neurologically for us to fully attend to another person and be driving a car or messing with the computer or catching up on housework. It's just not possible. And as tempted as we may be to be super productive and multitask, and I've done it. I did it last night. I was in my car driving home from work on a coaching call. But I'd like to challenge all of us as much as possible to give our full attention physically, emotionally, spiritually to our coaching calls. And so the first question on your checklist is, did I give my full attention to the conversation? The second item is, did I listen to understand without interjecting my own opinion? And for some of you, that will be the hardest skill you develop. And you may say, well, I didn't interject my own opinion. What I did was I told them about an experience that I've had so that they wouldn't know that I understand. And what I'm going to ask all of us to do is to save that for later in conversations. In the early stages of a conversation, let's let it be about the coachee as they tell us. Later, once the connection has been established, we can tell them how our experience intersects theirs. But a lot of times what happens is someone says, oh, I had a terrible day. And we said, oh, I had a terrible day too. And what we've essentially said is, this conversation is about me. It's not about you. And we didn't mean to say that, and we may not even believe that, but that's what we convey. So we want to save any kind of interjecting until later in a conversation. First, we just want to listen to understand. Third question is, did I reflect my understanding back to the other person? And we've talked about that. And then the fourth question is, did I talk too much? And did I ask good questions that helped move the conversation below the surface? I am always in danger of talking too much. And the reason that I do that is, down deep, I really do believe that what I have to say is what's going to make a difference in that other person's life. And the reality is that they are probably going to remember the conclusions they came to as I guided them with questions and with understanding longer than they are going to remember whatever amazing words of wisdom I gave them. Sometimes the coachee themselves is really giving us the vibe, okay, say something magic, fix this, say something really wise, make my feelings go away or make my problems go away. And we want to be really careful not to be sucked into that, to really remember there is power in just the listening and creating that space for that person to say what they need to say and asking the right questions is really at least as important and often more important than whatever amazing words of wisdom I feel like I need to share. There are times that I'm on the other end of that spectrum. I think I don't have anything good to say. I can't fix this. And that's actually a blessing. When we're in a place where we're thinking, I can't fix this, as helpless as we feel, as much as we hate that, that creates space for God to do His thing. We very much want to jump in and fix things for people. Just the other day, about a month ago, my husband and I were talking, and I was talking to him about a problem, and he said, sweetie, I know, and he does know because I've trained him, he said, I know you don't want me to fix this. But honey, I can fix this. And bless his heart, he was so frustrated that what I really just needed him to do was to listen. And then later, it turned out he could fix it, and that was a good thing. But first what I needed was the listening. Another homework assignment I'm going to ask you to take on, is to ask 4 people about how you listen. And to ask them, and then this is going to be the hard part, to listen to what they say. To ask them, so how do I listen? When do you feel listened to by me? What do I do that gets in the way of my listening? And then to close your mouth and listen to what they have to say without defending yourself, without adding anything. All you want to do is say, thank you for telling me. And that's going to be a challenge. A lot of you who have been through a Faithwalking retreat know that I see a spiritual director on a regular basis. And right now, I see a woman named Joyce who I arrive at the church sanctuary where we have our sessions, and I sit down and we sit in silence for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, not seconds, but minutes. And in that time, she gets calm, and I can almost see her creating space for me. And when I start to talk, it's almost as though my words are that they just go into the space between us, and it almost feels like she just helps hold them there until I get everything out into the space that needs to be there. She never says anything. And at some point, once I start to slow down a little bit, she starts to ask some wise questions, and then she listens to my answers. And I will tell you, I rarely feel as calm, as cared for, as in touch with the Holy Spirit as I do after a session with Joyce. And I tell her sometimes, coming to see you reminds me of who I am. And the thing is, there have been a few times that she said really magical things that just changed everything, but that's really rare. Usually what happens is that somewhere in that calm silence, I'm able to hear the voice of God. And that's what we're going for as we listen for transformation.